Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel YNR Daily Spoiler. No one was ready for this. Today's Young and Restless spoiler delivered a shocking twist. Jack is completely stunned when he reading Matt's shocking secret from the past.
No one was prepared for this. Jack is stunned after reading Matt's shocking secret from the past. Matt Clark sat in the dark light of a cafe booth, watching the door. He'd rehearsed what he was going to say until the words seemed like hurtful objects that he had to handle with care. He had long waited to speak them. For years, his existence had been a patchwork of people's memories, half-truths, and the fine, sharp edges of rumor. Tonight, he intended to give someone the only thing that could cut through the tangle. Paper, cold, legal, unarguable paper. And his name. Jack Abbott was late. Jack had 1,000 reasons for being late, including a meeting, a temper, and an old memory that drew him back down the path of what he believed was settled. However, Jack was a man whose tardiness was frequently accompanied with the belief that nothing short of calamity would change him. When he finally entered the cafe, he was exhausted from long days and filled with the desire to be in control. He inhaled the steam of hot coffee and sat opposite Matt. And for a brief moment, they were the only two men under the neon glow. "Why are you asking me here, Matt?" Jack inquired, brusquely and practically. Matt smiled tiny and crookedly. "Because you were always honest with me. Once," he added softly. "You used to be Jack. And I need honesty today." Jack's brow rose. "Do you expect me to sit and be sentimental?" "I'm not sentimental," Matt responded. "I'm done with half-truths." He slid a thin manila envelope across the table. Jack watched the borders like he was seeing a trap close. "What is that?" Jack asked. "Paper," Matt answered. "Records. A discharge form, a birth log, and a nurse's letter. Things you might not want to believe. Things that explain a lot." Jack's mouth constricted. "You better have a good reason for making me run out into a rainstorm." Matt met his gaze with a steadiness that Jack found very familiar. "Because you should understand the reality about who I am. And you deserve to know what was done in your name." Jack laughed shortly, raising his guard. "In my name?" "Yes," Matt answered. "In your name." The heart ignores some information until it can't. Papers appear in rooms as patient witnesses. Jack reluctantly opened the packet, his fingers brushing against images and a yellowed hospital band. He discovered the ghosts of a night he hadn't thought about in years, a hospital ledger with a name scrawled in a hurried hand, an old nurse's note that read, "Infant switched for observation," and most shockingly, a handwritten letter from a woman who had once been trusted by the Abbotts, one that ended with a plea. "If you ever want to know, look for Matthew Clark. Do not let him be alone because of us." Jack's mouth became dry. "This is nonsense," he answered. "For a man's first instinct is to reject the world's teeth when something threatens a lifetime of certainty." Matt's following line was like a gradual demolition. "You signed on a ledger, Mr. Abbott," he informed me. "Your signature is there. As a philanthropist. As someone who vouched for an infant's care at that facility." Jack's face was as closed as a book. "I signed a lot of stuff. I trusted others. This is a cover-up," Matt explained. "A rescue disguised as a ledger. When the hospital lost track of 2 babies, my file was tagged with a Newman-approved transfer. Someone who wished to ensure that an Abbott infant was rescued from scandal, ensured my name was rerouted. They listed my adoption papers with your mark on them." Jack read the nurse's note again. "Someone has put Abbott guarantee in block letters, with a date underneath." The occasion was over 30 years ago, when Jack remembered the Abbott family as peaceful and children as abstractions rather than characters. Memory is a perilous creature that preserves the comfy bits while discarding the compromises. "What are you saying?" Jack mumbled, as if speaking loudly enough might bring a guy from the past to deny everything. "That's what the records say," Matt stated calmly. "That's why I asked you to see them first. Because there is more. It's one thing to be a recipient of history. It's quite another to write it." Jack felt something shift inside his chest, a coldness, similar to how a patient's condition can suddenly worsen. He protected the family, closed files, and constructed enterprises based on committee and council decisions. Has he been involved? Had he given consent to transport child? He had also been a man of power back then, one who used power to smooth things over. He had done unspeakable things, but he justified them to himself as survival measures. A stranger's life sat on top of that survival, like a bruise. Matt leaned forwards. I've run my own tests. Jack's hand reached into his pocket, like a man looking for an alibi. You're talking like it's scientific. It is, Matt answered. I got a DNA test done, not long ago, to make sense of the blank spaces in my history. The lab matched my DNA to yours. He studied Jack's expression for a moment. Legally delivered truth isn't friendlier for Pace. Jack closed his eyes. For a brief moment, the cafes were calmed to a hum of mechanical sounds. The espresso machine sigh, a couple laughing in the corner, and the rain's steady tapping. He imagined his children, abrupt, immediate thoughts of Tracy and Ashley, Billy's stubborn jaw, as if a family portrait had become blurry at the corners. If the test was correct, it meant that a life had been saved, a life had been exchanged, and an Abbott had been relocated. It implied that a secret had been kept under his name. Are you sure? Jack finally inquired, though his voice did not sound like one who believed that any response could alleviate the tremble he felt. Matt nodded. I checked. Twice. I had the sample tested by an independent laboratory. The stats do not lie. Our shared characteristics make us unmistakably linked. Jack felt a faint sense of sickness. You expect me to do what? Take this at face value. No, Matt replied. I expected you to be a reasonable man. That is why I wanted to give you time. To process. To see what you might do. Because whatever you decide, it won't change the reality that I've been living with a hole. I needed to know who erected the walls surrounding that hole. For an hour, they sat in a tense silence, full with questions. Jack's mind was like a lawyer's ledger, possible explanations, forgeries, and manipulations. He was familiar enough with corporate fraud and desperate souls to recognize that almost anything might be faked. The concept that a child's life could be redirected by ledger line and signature seemed feasible in the dark days before surveillance. Video logs and databases buttressed every truth. But then he discovered the nurse's note. It was a small cramped script, and the paper was thin from age. It recounted in stark bits that the hospital had misdiagnosed 2 newborns and, in a frenzy, had arranged for one infant's guardianship to be placed under the protection of a wealthy donor database. We thought we were protecting the family name, the letter stated. We were mistaken. I apologize. Jack's hands trembled. He had awoken in boardrooms at 3 a.m. and made decisions that caused suits to bend. He had felt that his decisions were for the greater benefit. Now the larger good appeared smaller and more expensive than he had thought. When Jack finally left the cafe, an hour later than he expected, the rain had ceased and the streets smelt of wet cement and fresh opportunities. He held the manila packet as if it were contraband. When he got home, he locked himself in his office, closed the blinds, and sat with the papers strewn out like evidence on his desk. He called Diane. He called Billy. He called a private counselor he'd previously hired for minor personal crises. He tried to maintain his calm, but it had thinned like stale bread. He had always taken pleasure in his ability to cope with the harsh facts of life. A secret that touches your own blood, however, causes your center of gravity to shift. Word in Genoa City is a strange beast. It enjoys being fed, prodded, and massaged. It thrives on a mission and grows accustomed to silence. When the envelope left Matt's palm and landed beneath Jack's gaze, it began a story that moved like a loose thread through a tailored suit. Jack did not want to make charges. He enjoyed investigation. He called an old buddy from Genoa City Memorial who had been to the hospital decades before. He wanted access to archival records. He demanded digital logs. He commissioned a private forensics outfit to scan the nurse's handwriting. The wheels worked slowly and purposefully. Realities in big mansions rarely arrive overnight. However, they will finally arrive, inexorably and unavoidably, like the tide. It did not prevent people from gossiping. When Victor Newman caught wind, He felt both chagrin and amusement. "The city's full of surprises," he said Nikki, casting one of those secretive glances that suggested he relished watching other dynasties fail. Victor's emotions are rarely straightforward. He frequently smelt leverage where others smelt controversy. But even he halted, his eyes narrowing. If Jack had anything to hide, it was typically something useful. When Diane heard the rumor, her expression turned flinty with mistrust. She adored Jack in the sense of families who had been wronged and then discovered the value of battle. She insisted on viewing the papers personally. Nikki, who had known the Abbott and Newman houses for decades, felt saddened by the prospect of unexpected connection. Families in Genoa City are tangled mosaics made up of connections, betrayals, and the occasional fragile compassion. A new lineage didn't make matters simpler. It heightened their sense of urgency. Matt, for his part, watched it all happen with a strange mix of relief and horror. Relief because the knowledge, being known, released something in him, similar to releasing air out of a balloon. Dread because this knowledge transforms relationships into legal and emotional battlegrounds. He sat on the outskirts of the city's chatter and considered what he wanted. He didn't desire money. He didn't want to replace anybody. He desired recognition, an acknowledgement that he existed, and had always been on the edges. That fundamental human thing felt like the only legitimate claim he could make. When Jack eventually met Matt again, this time in the quiet of Jack's study, with the shade shut and Diane by his side, the air was tense like a pulse before something cracks. "Why now?" Jack demanded, not angry, but frustrated that time had brought him a new type of agony. "Because I thought if I told you quietly, maybe you'd help," he replied. "Perhaps you'll accept me. Perhaps things will remain humane." Jack's laugh lacked humor. "Do you realize how this reads? Like an ambush?" Matt offered. "Like you've accused me of lying about my own history," Jack grumbled. "Like you've brought me a bomb." Diane's presence soothed Jack. "We'll get to the bottom," she stated. "But first, DNA. You mentioned you had tests." Matt slid the results across the desk. The lab's logo was unremarkable, but the numbers were not. The paper described with scientific accuracy the markers that showed a first-degree biological link. There was a table, a percentage, and a conclusion with no wriggle room. Jack sat down abruptly. Diane's hand shot to her mouth. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet ticking of a wall clock. "This can't be right," Jack muttered. He felt the earth tilt. The things he'd created, the facades, the silent deals, all of them reframed by the idea that a child he'd never raised, but to whom he had a legal connection, had been living a life defined by that secret. "That's what your lawyer said the first time he got a paternity suit," Matt mumbled, sarcasm creeping in like an old scar. "I am not here to sue you, Jack. I am here because I needed you to know." Jack's hand shrank instantly, like if he was chilly. "Why did you wait? Why are you coming now?" "Because secrets have costs," Matt explained. "I wanted to know if you would accept me honestly, as your son, or if I would be used as leverage when the time was right." Jack stood and approached the window. The city gleamed indifferently. He felt something inside him unfold that he couldn't identify. A parent is many things, and the word's edges sprung to life in his chest. He imagined a different existence, a different childhood, a different set of breakfasts and boardrooms. He also felt a sense of betrayal. How had someone transformed the ledger into something that eliminated a life? "Diane," he muttered, as if the name were Annette. Did we do this? Did we?" Diane shook her head slowly. "Not that I recall. During those years, we did whatever was necessary. However, there were multiple hands on a ledger. Hospitals make mistakes. People made decisions. We will discover the truth." The following weeks were chaotic, presented like a careful courtroom play. Records were obtained from archives, and the hospital's clerical logs were reviewed line by line. Old nurses were tracked down and asked to remember the night. Old doctors remembered details and became silent over coffee. Forensics compared signatures. A handwriting expert testified to the ledger's authenticity. A specialist recreated the hospital's layout as if it were a staging for reality. Each layer either pointed to a nice explanation or prompted another question. Matt remained calm in the midst of the storm. He met with Jack not as an adversary, but as someone seeking recognition, an apology, and possibly a bridge. Jack, shocked and brittle from unspoken anguish, began to see Matt differently. He found himself listening to things Matt had told 100 times. Foster homes, teachers who had doubted him, and men who had pledged help but then moved away. Each story is based on a new possible narrative. If Jack was his biological father, those stories did not have to be the entire story. The prospect of an Abbott name in Matt's life sparked both optimism and guilt. Victor, understandably, smelt an angle. He observed the two men. "Blood changes everything," he murmured to Nikki, his eyes anxious for a result. But even Victor paused. Something fundamental resists when the simplest, most authentic pieces of family are exposed. Money and influence have their purposes, but having a son under your roof carries a moral weight that can derail even the most carefully laid schemes. When the hospital ultimately apologized for clerical confusion, an awkward corporate explanation that attempted to be humble but was quickly chastised for being cold, the city had already mobilized into camps. Pundits argued what it meant to be a family. Some suggested Jack open his life and make amends. Others warned about the negative aspects of paternal revelation, such as expectations, claims, and how a new child can be exploited by foes. Jack refused to be paraded. He refused to close himself like a safe. He did something unexpected. He extended an olive branch to Matt in a way that seemed more than just legal. "Come home," he said one wet evening, in a phrase intended to be simple and definitive. "Stay for as long as you like. Let's chat. We will figure it out." Matt's reply was nearly inaudible. "Are you sure?" Jack's response was straightforward in its lack of bravado. "No, but I'm prepared to try." The family's sticky glue moves slower than news. It does not occur during a sound bite. It occurs during modest meals, late-night debates about nothing, shared silences over funeral plans, and small joys. Jack and Matt's relationship did not become flawless. It grew convoluted in the true Abbott style, familiar gruffness eased by minor courtesies, counsel sessions in a lawyer's office, and the awkwardness of two men acquiring a family lingo. Diane sat with Jack at night, watching him reconcile his perception of himself with the man he could become. "You always thought your life was neat," she told me. "Maybe it's more honest now." Jack smiled, an expression of embarrassment and relief on his face. "I've always wanted to think so. This is different. Harder. Better." Victor smiled as men do when they can't help themselves. "Let's call it a new asset," he joked with Nikki. But he, too, felt the pull of the human. In Genoa City, secrets are the currency, and confessions are the most valuable coin. Matt's disclosure was a grenade thrown into two dynasties. It had burst, leaving behind a changed landscape. But among the rubble, there were twice as many opportunities for apologies, reckonings, and the tedious job of repairing relationships that had been strained by the wrong type of order. Jack and Matt would have numerous talks that attempted, failed, and succeeded in halves. They would dispute over money, because where there is family, there is inheritance, and the legal system will not clean up after the human heart. They would also sit in solitude, drink horrible coffee, and watch television, shows their fathers used to enjoy. Joe Abbott used to say that tiny gestures build lives far more than ledgers. When the rain stopped, Genoa City breathed deeply and continued to hum. The story traveled and settled like dust on furniture. Some cleaned it away, others left it as memory. But for Jack Abbott, the night he opened a manila envelope in a rainy cafe was the night he realized that life was bigger and more startling than his orderly files. For Matt, it was the night he stopped being a piece and became something more, a man bonded by blood to a family he never expected to have. No one had prepared for it. Nobody had requested the rearrangement. But as families do, they began to pull themselves back together, awkwardly and imperfectly, despite their flaws and bravery.